Pagan gods, false deities, have existed since the dawn of time, and people have bowed down and worshipped them from the pre-flood antediluvian age to this very day. We see these people bowing down and worshipping idols, and we think to ourselves, what are you thinking? You have just created this figure out of stone, out of wood, whatever it may be, and now you are bowing down and worshipping it? How does that make sense? How can you be so misguided as to worship an inanimate object? What if I told you that the pagan gods, the false gods of this earth, are real? That they're not just idols, they're not just images made of wood or stone, but in fact are something far more sinister. In today's video, we'll be investigating what these gods may be. Now, you may be saying, there is only one God. It's obvious these things are not gods. These idols that people worship, they're nothing, they're not real. Well, today, we're going to find out why these gods may be more real than you think. In order to guide us on this journey, we'll be listening to Dr. Michael Heiser, Gary Wayne, and Rob Skiba. Now, this conversation is going to be heavily dependent on a certain interpretation of Genesis chapter 6. To those of you who aren't familiar, I did 2 prior videos on the topic covering the fallen angels and the Nephilim that are featured in Genesis 6. You can check them out up here, or I'll leave them down in the description as well. But for the sake of this video, I'll give you a brief rundown. Angels in heaven looked down on earth and saw women and thought they were beautiful. These angels decided to take wives of them and created half-angel, half-human hybrids known as the Nephilim. Thus, the giants were born. Immediately, you should see parallels to Greek mythology. You have the Greek pantheon coming down, intermingling with human women and creating these half-hybrids, these demigods. And to drive things home even further, the fallen angels descended upon Mount Hermon. That's where they resided, just like the Greek gods live on Mount Olympus. So the idea here is these false gods, these pagan deities that people worship are not fake. They are in fact real spiritual or hybrid beings that have existed since the dawn of time. Now, your mind might be spinning with a multitude of questions right now, so let's dive into our first speaker so he can explain his interpretation of all of this. Without further ado, here is Gary Wayne.
When you say the second incursion, which was after the flood, is this an implication that Genesis 6 happened again, or is this more of a homage to the Gilgamesh and the Greek? Like there were giants that created boats and survived. Is that second incursion a repeat?
Well, my understanding and how I apply the term second incursion, again, it's not in the Bible, that term. So it's a name that's been applied to what would be understood and how I would understand it as other angels, fallen, would go after the flood in spite to recreate the giants.
They did it again.
Yeah. So what's interesting in the Bible is we look at Nephilim as the giants, and that's true. Nephilim goes back in Genesis 6:4, where it has the KJV where it says giant. That's the word Nephil. The male plural is Nephilim as the giant ones. So they can use it in singular or in plural. And it also means a bully, and it also means a tyrant. Both description of giants, just as bulls were gods and their offspring were called gods throughout polytheism. These are the bulls of Bashan that are referenced throughout the Bible, and the ones mocking Jesus on the cross in Psalms 22. So we have a better understanding. And you also have tyrants going back to Tyrannos, which is the Gyges kings, giant kings out of polytheism, who were tyrants. These were, Gyges is the Greek word for giant. This second incursion, as it relates to the Nephilim, is interesting because Nephilim doesn't show up after the flood biblically in terms of being actual beings. As we look at Numbers 13:33 in the embellished or the evil report, as is talked about of the scouts that have gone into for Moses to explore the land of the covenant, they come back and say there were Anakim there, and the Anakim are the descendants of giants. So the Anakim, though, are not Nephilim, but they're still giants. And how you get there is Deuteronomy 2. Deuteronomy 2 has a whole list of giants after the flood, like the Ahorim, like the Emim, like the Zamzuzim, like the Avim, like the Kajulhim. These are giants, but that's not the Hebrew word for Nephilim. It's Rapha and Raphaim. And Raphaim are a tribe of giants as it's described as well. Now there's a series of words with Rapha, 7495, meaning to heal, because the giants had this healing ability. 7496 is an evil spirit, which is the disembodied spirit of the giant and a derivative of 7495. And 7497 is the giant and tribe of giant. The two ones that follow after that are names of people named Rapha, but all derivative of 7495. Teraphim, which is a talking idol, is a derivative of 7495 as well in the Old Testament. And that's somehow this talking idol is different than the other idols. It's like the one that Rachel takes back steals from her father Laban, that is this family idol. It says image there, but that word image goes back to teraphim. Now, teraphim is also used and translated exactly from the Hebrew that way, and why they don't do image there, I don't know why, as teraphim, but not all the translations are perfectly consistent in the same application for that talking idol that could also heal, and it roots back to Rapha. So these Raphaim giants are somehow distinct from the Nephilim that's recorded in Deuteronomy 2, while the Anakim are giants in Deuteronomy 2 and also Rephaim. So where do these Rephaim giants come from? So they're either a different name for the giant, but why would they be named differently when they're called Nephilim in the beginning? Well, we get this interesting sort of concept that there are either different names for the same group of giants or there's something different. And so the giants that are recorded in the Ugaritic text, for example, which has a ruling council called the Baalim Council, with Baal being the son of El, Anat being his consort, Ashtaroth before the flood consort of El, and gods like Amaru, and several other ones, and I won't go through all of the names. They created Rephaim after the flood as a second incursion. And the Ugaritic texts are written in Semitic, which is where Hebrew derives from. So the words are very close in a lot of cases. And so the RPM would have been original Hebrew. Same with the RPM in the original Ugaritic text. So we get a second incursion account by offspring gods who rule after the flood versus the parent gods who ruled before the flood. The parent gods who ruled before the flood go to the pit prison. Offspring gods take over as the disloyal or rebellious host. Hebrew Saba for an army of angels, rank and order so they would move up. So Baal moves up to replace El. Osiris moves up to replace Ra. Zeus moves up to replace Kronos. All of these create giants after the flood. So now you get a constant, and now we get some data points as to these are different somehow. And they also have a fertility issue, which the Nephilim didn't have.
Now, our second speaker has a different interpretation. He doesn't believe in a second incursion where another set of fallen angels came down and created Nephilim, just like in Genesis 6. He thinks something else happened. So let's hear what he has to say. Without further ado, here is Rob Skiba.
Let's look at Genesis 6:12 a little more closely here. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. That's about all we get. You know, it's just a tiny little snapshot. But if you look in the synchronized biblically endorsed actually biblical text, you see in Joshua 4:18, and their judges and rulers went to the daughters of men and took their wives by force from their husbands according to their choice. And the sons of men in those days took from the cattle of the earth and the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air and taught the mixture of animals of one species with the other in order therewith to provoke the Lord. And God saw the whole earth, and it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways on the earth, all men and all animals. Backed up by another witness in Jubilees 7:24. I believe where you see the after this in Jubilees right here, I believe the after this of Jubilee 7 is synonymous with the after that of Genesis 6:4. In Jubilee 7, this is a recap. This is after the flood, and Noah's sort of giving a recap of what happened that caused the flood. And he says, and after all these angels mated with women and everything, this is still in a pre-flood context, he says, and after this, they sinned against the beasts and the birds and all that moved and walked on the earth, and much blood was shed on the earth, and every imagination and desire of men imagined vanity and evil continually. This, as I like to say, is, as Paul Harvey would say, this is the rest of the story for Genesis 6:12. It's how all flesh became corrupted in a pre-flood context. Now, when I was really first studying this and looking into this, I began to wonder, what is this sinned against the animals deal? And of course, I read Joshua 4:18 and Jubilee 7:24 and came to believe that sinned against the animals is a reference to genetic manipulation, which created the animal-human hybrids of mythology, which appears to have also made a way for the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim to have host bodies to once again inhabit, thus bringing about their return. What am I talking about here? Well, we have the days of Jared, watchers come down, they mate with women. Enoch tells you that the first generation Nephilim would only live for 500 years, and that they were to kill each other off in a massive civil war that their parents had to watch. How many of you have kids? How many of you would like to see your kids massacre each other? Anybody? No, of course not. That'd be very difficult to watch, right? Part of their severe judgment was for them to watch their beloved ones massacre each other. And the text refers to it as their beloved ones, so they loved their children. That was part of their judgment, was to watch their children kill each other off. Josephus likens the first generation Nephilim to the Titans of Greek mythology. So I believe that this 500-year civil war that Enoch writes about is what the Greeks later stylized and what became known as the Clash of the Titans. You've seen the movie The Clash of the Titans? I believe that's where it all goes back to. I believe it goes back to that story right there. But 1,200 years before the flood is the days of Jared. Okay, days 3550 BC. It's about 1,200 years before the flood. That's when they arrive. They get busy pretty quick. They start mating with women. They have children. 500 years they're allowed to live and kill each other off. Then the watchers who gave birth to these children, or who mated with women who gave birth to these children, were judged, bound, and buried for 70 generations. And then eventually Enoch is raptured, sometime shortly thereafter. Well, that's 700 years before the flood. All that's over and done with, 700 years before the flood. So that begs the question, what happened? Why did God get so upset within those 700 years? I believe that's the after this time frame that we're talking about here. And as I was looking at this scenario right here, I happened to read this quote in Dr. Judd Burton's book before I met him. He said, despite the loss of their physical bodies, there is reason to believe that the giants' spirits continued to exist. In this state, they were and are demonic entities. Like other sentient creatures, they have an eternal spirit at their essence. Therefore, the Nephilim and related tribes of giants never really ceased to exist. Only their physicality was lost. And I agree with that 100%. The book of Enoch tells you point blank that the demons or the wandering or the evil spirits were the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim that were killed. So when you have the clash of the Titans, those first generation Nephilim, however many there were, when they were killed off in the Civil War, their spirits went out and became wandering spirits. They lost their physicality. They're looking for bodies again. So what happened next? I believe they started this process of the genetic manipulation that we read about in Joshua 4:18 and Jubilee 7:24. They started to create host bodies for their spirits to go into. We learned from Paul that there's one flesh for birds, one for animal, one for humans. You read that quote, I think it's in 1st or 2nd Corinthians, where he's talking about that. When Genesis talks about God breathed into Adam's nostrils and he became a living soul, the Hebrew word there is nephesh. It's the same word used for the living creatures when he's making the animals. It is my opinion that God has a God-prescribed nephesh for a bird, for a dog, for a cat, for lizards, fish, and humans. So if that's the case, if that's true, what happens when you blend, let's say, a human with a goat? There's no God-prescribed nephesh for a human goat, for a satyr. So in my opinion, what you end up with is you've created a host body that is fit for a disembodied spirit to go ahead and get into. And those animal-human chimera may have been similar in characteristics to their fathers. Like reproduces after like, right? Judd talked about Azazel. Azazel is traditionally associated with the goat. So it is my opinion that the satyrs were later representation or manifestations of host bodies for the like spirit of the Azazel human Nephilim that, once they were killed off, that goat-like demonic spirit would find a host body that would be appropriate for it. Does that make sense?
So, according to Gary Wayne and Rob Skiba, the Nephilim pre-flood and post-flood could have been worshipped as gods for their great power and size. However, there's another interpretation, one that I think you might find equally interesting. To explain his point of view, here is Dr. Michael Heiser.
Israel was supposed to be the mediator between God, the true God, and all these other nations. See, what happens at Babel is the Old Testament explanation for why the other nations have other gods, where pantheons come from. Because the sons of God who are given charge over the nations don't do a good job. Here's what they do. We read it earlier today in Psalm 82. God is judging the gods in his council. How long will you judge unjustly? Show partiality to the wicked. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and needy. I mean, you're not doing all this stuff. And the result is, look at what's in, your people have neither knowledge or understanding. They walk about in darkness. The whole foundations of the earth are shaken. Okay, what I wanted was for you to rule justly because I still love humanity. And I want to use my new people, Israel, to be a conduit of truth to them, from me to them, and bring them back into the family. But what you're doing is resulting in chaos throughout the whole earth. The psalm ends with the psalmist saying, "Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations." The psalmist wants this to end. He wants the chaos of the nations taken care of. The reason I have this highlighted, again, we can't go into this either, but if you know what the Septuagint is, it's the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. The word here for arise in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible is the word for resurrection. And it happens 3 or 4 times where the resurrection is associated with the reclaiming of the nations. This is just one of several passages. And Paul knows this. He knows it really well. Because 5 or 6 times, Paul, when he talks about the resurrection, he doesn't talk about being his ideal weight. He doesn't talk about getting his hair back, getting better eyesight. As soon as he thinks of the resurrection, he thinks about the conquest of the rulers, the powers, the principalities. He does it 6 different places. He thinks of one and goes to the other. Now, again, this is the way it was supposed to work, but it doesn't work this way. And what this is the root, and we'll cover this in the last 5 minutes here. This whole idea of God scattering the nations, assigning them to other gods, and those gods become corrupt. They destroy their nations. They turn the hearts of their people to worship them. They turn the hearts of people to idolatry. It's a mess. It's the Old Testament explanation for after the flood, everybody knew who the true God was. After Babel, things just really go downhill. Okay. It turns into the system that we sort of know about the ancient world. You could go to Plato and find the same worldview. You can go to Greco-Roman writers. The pagan world believed the same thing, that they worship the gods they do and their neighbors worship some other god because that's how the Most High wanted it. You'll actually find that in non-biblical pagan texts. Again, when Paul goes to a pagan city, he knows that they share the same worldview, and it's a platform for the gospel. But before we get there, that's going to be the subject of the next session. This is the foundation for what we call spiritual warfare and cosmic geography. Daniel 10, the Prince of Persia, Prince of Greece. Yep. Where do we get this idea of supernatural princes over nations? Deuteronomy 32, the Babel story. Now on your left here, I have it in Hebrew. That's for Logos Bible software, we have the Dead Sea Scrolls in Hebrew, the biblical scrolls. So you can find this in 4Q37, Okay, fragment 35. Here's an actual picture of it from the Dead Sea Scrolls website. You'll notice B'nai Elohim. And you say, well, why bring this up, Mike? Because let's look at Deuteronomy 32:8-9. And if you have another version besides ESV, you might want to look at it. I'll show you an example or two. But ESV reads this. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind. When did that happen? When did mankind get divided? Okay, that's Babel. He fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. Oh, there's that phrase again, sons of God, supernatural beings. But the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob, Israel, is his allotted heritage. Now, little footnote here in ESV tells you that sons of God is what the Dead Sea Scrolls say, and the Septuagint, which is the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible that Jesus and the apostles used. This is B'nai Elohim, sons of God. This is what the Dead Sea Scrolls say. If you go out, let's just pick another translation here. We'll go with NIV. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided all mankind, he set up boundaries to the peoples according to the number of the sons of Israel. Now, wait a minute. Did God divide up the nations and fix who they are according to the number of the sons of God or the sons of Israel? This is the oldest text we have of the Hebrew Bible. Dead Sea Scrolls. That's why they're important. Dead Sea Scrolls have sons of God. So does the Septuagint, the ancient translation again. Most of our modern English translations do not use the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so you will never see a connection. Let's go back here. You will never see a connection between this reference to Babel and the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. But there is one. You say, well, what is it? I mean, what happened here? What's going on? What does it mean? This is where Daniel gets his theology. I'll just summarize it for you. What happens at Babel? Okay, we had a flood. We've got the fall. We've got the Genesis 6, 1-4 thing. We've got the flood. It cleanses the earth, and all this bad stuff's happening because of rebellion, both supernatural rebellion and human rebellion. The flood is a reset button, okay? And so Noah and his sons get out of the ark, and God repeats the Edenic mandate to them, just like he did with Adam and Eve. Be fruitful, multiply, spread over the earth and all that stuff. So what do? They don't do it. You read Genesis 11, and the text actually says that, some guy saying, well, let's build a tower here, lest we get dispersed over the whole earth. Oh, in other words, like, lest we obey? Yeah. They do the exact opposite. They congregate at this place called Babel, and they build a tower. What's the tower? Again, basically all biblical scholars in the Old Testament are going to say that the tower is a ziggurat. Okay, it's Babel. All right, this is how towers were built, these step pyramid things, okay? Why would you build one? You would build a tower, you would build a ziggurat, because it's part of a temple complex. They all are. Why would you build a temple complex? Well, why did ancient people do that? You know why they did that? So they could do rituals and bring the deity to them, to locate the deity and have relationship with it. It's the exact opposite of what God asked them to do. No, I'm not here at your beck and call. I am not going to be tamed. Okay? I'm not on your leash. I told you what to do, and you're not doing it. Okay?
That's why God got so mad at what they were doing.
At Babel. He changes the languages. He scatters the nations. Who are the nations? We have a list of them in Genesis 10. In Genesis 9, tells us that the list in Genesis 10 are the ones that extend from the sons of Noah. Those are the nations of the world, blah, 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 blah. We have this whole picture, but when God does it, he does it according to the number of the sons of God. Now, if we went elsewhere in Scripture, what happens is God says, I want a divorce. I am fed up. Have you ever wondered, well, I'm reading through Genesis, and like everybody knows who the true God is, and then you get to this Babel thing, and it's like nobody knows who he is. And look, Abraham's parents are idolaters. We find that out in the book of Joshua. Like, where did idolatry come from? How are they worshiping other gods if everybody knew that the one true God? Like, where'd this come from, Babel? It comes from this incident. God assigns each nation other members of the heavenly host. Now, the plan is, again, I'm skipping a lot here because normally I do this in 30 hours. The plan is that they're supposed to be placeholders. They are supposed to keep the people on the right track. Keep the knowledge of the true God alive. Treat your people well. But I am not going to have a relationship with you. You are under judgment. You're under punishment. I'm still interested in you because what happens next in the biblical story? God divorces humanity. I'm done. I've had it up to here. I'm going to split you up. I'm going to assign you to other gods. And basically, I'm assigning those gods to you. And we're going to see how that works. You don't want me to be your God? Well, let's try something else. In the meantime, I'm going to go to Ur, and I'm going to pick this guy, Abram, and I'm going to start over. I'm going to start a new Eden humanity with him. I'm going to raise up a new humanity group to have a relationship with. I'm no longer having a relationship with the nations. Okay? Now, God doesn't, he doesn't mean that I never want to see you again. Why? How do we know that? Because when God goes to Abram and makes a covenant with him, what does he say? It's going to be through you and your seed that all of these other nations will ultimately be blessed. God doesn't lose interest completely, but they're under punishment. So God goes, look, Deuteronomy 32:9. Israel is Yahweh's portion. I'm done with everybody else. I'm going to start my own group again. And he goes to Abram and Sarah is perfect because she can't have kids. Because everybody on the planet is going to know that Israel exists because of a supernatural act of God. I'm going to make them a kingdom of priests. This is Exodus language. They are going to represent me to the rest of the nations. And at some point, the nations will be brought back into the family. So in verse 8 of Psalm 82:8, this is what gives us the hook back into Deuteronomy 32, because the psalm ends with the psalmist, crying out, "Oh God, take back the nations." So at some point in the future, the gods of the nations they're going to die like men. They're going to be punished. They're going to be done away with. And this is what the psalmist wants, because he wants the nations brought back in. Now, let's think about the theology we have here. We've got a situation where God divorces humanity. The nations that are going to be enemies of Israel are assigned, allotted is Deuteronomy's language, to other gods. This is the Old Testament explanation for why the people of the nations worship other gods, like that they don't have a relationship with the true God. This is the answer. It's Babel. This event frames the entirety of the rest of the Old Testament. Because from this point on, it's Israel against the nations and Yahweh against the gods.
So, as Dr. Michael Heiser said, there's a council of gods in heaven that have been set over the nations, angels that have been set over different territories. And it seems like there was a falling out, and these angels started to lead these nations astray. Now, I want you to think about all of this and how severe this is. People in these false religions, worshiping these false gods and pagan idols. What if they weren't worshiping a man-made creation? What if they just weren't worshiping nothing? What if there was a real and sinister power behind all of these gods? It would make sense why when God wrote the Ten Commandments, his first one was, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." With that said, what do you think about all of this? Could these pagan gods, could these false gods throughout history have actually been real? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. And I'll see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.